It started with a DNA kit. My coworker Dana got me one for my birthday as a joke. She wrapped it in a box with a bow and wrote on the card, "Find out if you're secretly interesting." I laughed. Everyone at the small departmental birthday gathering laughed. I set it on my kitchen counter when I got home and forgot about it for 3 weeks. It sat next to my coffee maker, next to the dish soap, becoming part of the visual noise of my kitchen, a piece of ordinary clutter. I wasn't particularly curious about my ancestry. I knew what I was, or thought I did. Irish on my dad's side going back generations, a mix of German and Polish on my mother's. The standard Midwestern genetic casserole. My grandmother on my dad's side, Margaret, used to make soda bread at Christmas. My mother kept a small decorative plate with a Polish eagle painted above the kitchen doorway. I had a whole constructed identity built on these small cultural artifacts. Soda bread and pierogies, and the specific way my family pronounced certain vowels. I knew who I was. I thought I knew who I was. Picked up the kid on a Sunday in late October. Nothing else going on. The leaves had all come down early that year, and the street outside looked naked and gray. I was procrastinating on cleaning my bathroom. Figured I'd do the spit thing, mail it off, and then clean the bathroom. I did not clean the bathroom. You spit into this small tube, seal it, register the barcode online, drop it in the mail. The whole process takes maybe 12 minutes. I went back to watching a documentary about Victorian sewage systems. Forgot about it again. Results came back 5 weeks later. Email notification on a Wednesday morning at 7:43 a.m. I was eating cereal and half watching the news. Clicked the link mostly to have something to look at while I finished my breakfast. The page loaded with this colorful pie chart breaking down my estimated ancestry. I set my spoon down. Looked at it for a long time. The chart said I was 67% Ashkenazi Jewish, 18% Eastern European, 11% British and Irish, 4% unassigned. I looked at the chart, looked at my cereal, looked at the chart again, ate another spoonful of cereal because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Okay, so a lot of people get surprised by these tests. I know that. Genetics are weird. Heritage gets murky as family stories drift from reality over generations. That's normal. But 67% Ashkenazi Jewish is not a footnote. That's not a distant great-grandmother who nobody talked about. That is the dominant genetic reality of who I am. And I grew up eating soda bread and being told we were Irish Catholics. My dad coached my Little League in a Notre Dame hat. We had a ceramic shamrock magnet on the refrigerator for literally my entire childhood. I went to Mass on Christmas and Easter with varying degrees of sincerity. There was not a single thing in my upbringing. Not a photograph, not a holiday, not a food tradition, not a single conversation that pointed toward any of this. My first instinct was that the test was wrong. I'd read articles about these tests being inaccurate. I told myself it was a mix-up, a contamination, a statistical anomaly. I closed the browser tab. I opened it again, closed it, went to work, sat at my desk digitizing 1940s property records and thought about the chart. Thought about it all day. Opened the results on my phone during lunch in my car. Still 67%. The number had not changed while I was at work. Numbers rarely do. I called my mother that evening. I want to be clear about how I framed this call. I was careful. I was casual. I told her I'd done one of those DNA tests as a birthday thing. Told her it was interesting, that there was some unexpected European percentages. I asked her if she knew anything about her side of the family beyond what we'd always talked about. There was a pause on the line. Not a long one, maybe 2 seconds, but I've been replaying that pause in my head ever since. She said no, not really. Why? What did it say? I said, oh, nothing major, just curious. She said, those tests aren't always accurate, you know. I said, yeah, I'd heard that. We talked about other things. Her garden, whether I was eating enough, a neighbor's dog that kept getting into her yard. I said goodnight. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. That pause kept coming back to me. 2 seconds, the length of a breath held and then released. Here's the thing about working in municipal records. You get a particular relationship with documentation. You understand that the paper trail of a life is not the same as the life itself, but you also understand that the paper trail doesn't lie the way people do. It doesn't have pauses. It doesn't change the subject. So the next day at work, during my lunch break, I did something that felt a little obsessive even as I was doing it. I pulled up the public records database we use for work. I looked up my own birth certificate. I had a digital copy at home somewhere, but I'd never looked at it closely. Never had a reason to. The one that came up was a standard state-issued document. My name, date of birth, county of birth, hospital, mother's name, father's name. Everything looked normal. And then I looked at the box that says method of filing, and it said amended. Amended. Not original. Amended. I sat with that word for a long time. In records work, an amended birth certificate typically means one of a few things. A clerical error was corrected, a name was legally changed, or the document was reissued following an adoption. I told myself it was probably a clerical error. I told myself this very firmly. I went back to scanning ledgers. I scanned a property deed from 1947 and thought about the word amended. Scanned a business license from 1952 and thought about it. Scanned a marriage record from 1963 and thought about it. The word sat in my chest like a swallowed stone. I want to talk about my parents for a minute, because they're good people. I need to say that first. My dad, Robert, is the kind of man who fixes things. Not just around the house, though he does that too. He fixes situations. When something goes wrong, he becomes very calm and very focused, and he finds the solution. He coached Little League for 11 years. He showed up to every single school event I ever had. He taught me to drive in an empty mall parking lot on Sunday mornings. He called me on my birthday at exactly the minute I was born, 6:22 a.m. Every single year, without fail. 6:22 a.m. I would be asleep, obviously. He would say, "Happy birthday, kiddo," in this quiet voice like he was trying not to wake up the rest of the world. And then he let me go back to sleep, and I would lie there in the early morning dark feeling completely, unshakably loved. My mother, Carol, is warmer in a different way. More expressive, more worried, more present. She kept every drawing I ever made as a child.
I found a folder once in the hall closet labeled with my name and her handwriting. Inside were finger paintings, crayon drawings, a macaroni art Christmas tree from kindergarten. Kept all of it, every scrap. These are not the actions of people who didn't love me. I need you to understand that. Whatever else this story is, it is not a story about not being loved. But there were things, small things, that I had never assembled into a pattern before. Because you don't, do you? You don't walk around trying to build a case against your own family. You take each odd moment individually and you file it away as just that. An odd moment, a family quirk, a conversation that went a different direction than you expected. Nothing more. My parents never talked about my birth. I don't mean they were cold about it. I mean the specific story of my birth, the logistics of it, was never a story that got told. Most families have this story. The "it was 3 a.m. and we drove to the hospital in a snowstorm" story. The "you almost came in the elevator" story. The "your father fainted" story. Whatever it is, families repeat it. It becomes part of the mythology. I don't have that story. I never noticed I didn't have it. When I was a kid, I asked my mom once how long her labor was. She said, "Oh, it went fast. You were in a hurry." And then she changed the subject to something I can no longer remember. I filed it under "Mom doesn't like talking about medical stuff." Moved on. Never thought about it again. Until now. I never looked like either of them. This also seems obvious in retrospect, but here's the thing about growing up in a family. You look for resemblances. You find them. You hold on to them. "Oh, you have your father's eyes," people would say. And I would look in the mirror and find something I like about my eyes that seemed consistent with his. I am tall. My dad is not particularly tall, but my paternal grandfather was tall according to photographs, so I filed it there. My hair is dark brown, almost black, and very curly. My mother's hair is straight and light brown. My father's hair is straight and reddish brown, going gray. The curly hair I filed under must be a recessive gene somewhere. My skin is slightly olive-toned in summer. I tan easily. My parents both burn pink within 20 minutes. I filed this under genetic variation, totally normal. My nose is prominent and curved. My parents both have small, straight noses. I filed this under grandfather on mom's side had a bigger nose, I think. I have no actual memory of my maternal grandfather's nose. I constructed that memory after the fact to explain a feature I had. I understand that now. Here's another thing. My parents had no other children. I am an only child. They never explained it. It was never discussed. I asked once, when I was maybe 9 or 10, the way kids do, direct and unself-conscious, I asked why I didn't have a brother or sister. My mother said sometimes it just works out that way. My father, who was reading a newspaper, looked up briefly and then back down. I remember the look on his face in that moment. I couldn't have named it then. I was 9. Now I think it might be the face of someone maintaining composure in a situation where composure was required. I didn't sleep well for a few days after finding the DNA results. I'd lie in bed cataloging these memories. Not with any particular urgency, not yet. More like turning objects over my hands in the dark, examining their undersides for the first time, finding surfaces I'd never looked at before. I kept telling myself there was probably an explanation. Maybe the test was wrong. Maybe there was some distant Jewish ancestry on my mother's side that nobody knew about. Maybe her grandmother or great-grandmother had been Jewish and assimilated and the family had simply lost track of it. Things like that happened. It was history. People hid themselves, changed their names, moved to new towns, became other people. 67% seemed high for that explanation, but I clung to it. I ordered a second test from a different company. I took it on a Friday evening, spat in another tube, registered another barcode, and mailed it off. While I waited, I tried to live normally. I went to work. I ate meals. I called my parents the following Sunday as usual. The call felt exactly the same as every other call. My dad talked about a plumbing issue he was fixing. My mom asked if I was seeing anyone. I said, "No, Mom." She said, "Well, you should get out more." I said, "I get out fine." This is our ritual. It was identical to every other Sunday call. And yet, when I hung up, I sat on my couch for a while just holding the phone, feeling something large and unnamed pressing against the inside of my chest. The sensation of a word you can't quite remember. A shape without a name yet. The second test came back. 64% Ashkenazi Jewish, 19% Eastern European, 12% British and Irish, 5% unassigned. Close enough that the variation was just statistical noise, not a mix-up, not contamination. This was me. This was my genetic reality. I sat with the results on my laptop for a long time. Outside, it was raining lightly. I could hear the dry cleaner's press cycling below, that familiar mechanical rhythm. And I thought, I have been living in a story about myself that is not the true story. I don't know when that thought first arrived, but once it arrived, it did not leave. I want to tell you about Thanksgiving when I was 16, because this memory surfaced during those nights of cataloging, and I don't know what to do with it. We were at my aunt's house, my dad's sister, Patricia. Big family gathering. Lots of cousins, aunts, uncles, people I saw twice a year and never quite learned. At some point during the meal, somebody brought up ancestry. I don't remember why, probably a news story or a commercial for one of the DNA test services. They were becoming popular around that time. My aunt said, "Oh, we should all do one of those, find out if there are any surprises in the family." And there was a silence, not a long silence, but a silence. My dad said he didn't think those tests were very reliable. My mother was suddenly very focused on passing someone the gravy. The conversation moved on to something else. I remember my dad seemed unusually firm about a fairly trivial topic, and then I forgot about it. For 14 years, I forgot about it. Until this October, lying in bed at 3 a.m. cataloging, and it came back to me with the crystalline sharpness that memories sometimes develop when you finally understood what they were about. Quick thing before we go further. If you're finding this on the blog, welcome. There are stories posted there that haven't been narrated yet. Longer reads, different formats. If you move faster through text than audio, the link is in the description somewhere. Some of the best ones haven't made it to narration yet, so if you're reading this, you're already one step ahead. Back to the story. I want to be precise about what happened next, because it matters. I did not immediately confront my parents. I want you to understand why. It wasn't cowardice exactly, or it wasn't only cowardice. It was also that I was not yet sure what I was building toward. The DNA results were real. The amended birth certificate was real. But I needed to understand more before I walked into a conversation I couldn't walk back out of. So I did what I do. I went into the records. Not the public ones this time. I went to a professional genealogical research service, the kind that specializes in finding original birth records, pre-adoption documents, biological family information. I submitted my information and paid a fee that was significant but not ruinous. And then I waited again. A lot of this story is waiting. Waiting and noticing things I should have noticed years ago. While I waited, I went home for a weekend. My parents live about 2 hours away, in the town where I grew up. I told myself I was going home for normal reasons. To visit, to have my mom's cooking, to sit in the house I grew up in and feel grounded. This was partly true. It was also an investigation, though I couldn't quite admit that to myself yet.
I arrived Saturday afternoon. My dad was fixing something in the garage, which is where he always is. My mom was making dinner, which is where she always is on Saturday afternoons when I come home. The house smelled like it always smelled. Old wood and dish soap and whatever was in the oven. That smell hit me when I walked in the door, and something cracked open in my chest briefly. The specific grief of loving something and simultaneously suspecting it. After dinner, I offered to help my dad clean up, which I don't always do. And in the kitchen, washing dishes, I tried to do something very casual. I said I'd been thinking about family history lately, doing some research. I said it lightly, like someone making conversation. My dad handed me a wet plate and said, "Oh yeah?" I said, "Yeah, just curious about where we came from." He said, "We came from a long line of people who work too hard and complain too little," which was a joke he'd made before. I smiled. I said, "Did anything ever come up in your family about Jewish ancestry?" He turned off the water, turned to look at me. The silence was maybe 3 seconds. Then he said, "Not that I know of. Why?" I said, "Just curious. Those DNA test things make you think about it." He said, "Those tests are a lot of marketing more than science, you know?" I said, "Yeah, that's probably true." I dried the plate. He turned the water back on. We finished the dishes and went into the living room and watched a college football game. His team won by 4 points. He was satisfied in the quiet, internal way he always is when his team wins. I sat next to him on the couch, trying to memorize the shape of his profile, the way the light from the TV moved across his face. My dad, the man who called me at 6:22 a.m. every birthday without fail. I kept thinking, I am going to find something out, and the world is going to change, and I want to remember this version of it before I left. Sunday morning, my mother was in the hallway, hugging me goodbye the way she always does, longer than strictly necessary. She held on for a moment, and I felt the specific smallness of her. She's a small woman, and I thought about how I am tall and broad-shouldered and curly-haired and olive-skinned, and she is small and fair and straight-haired. And I have never in my life, not once, been mistaken for my mother's son by a stranger. People meeting us for the first time always looked slightly puzzled. I noticed this as a child, and I had always explained it with genetics again. Skip a generation, you look like someone we don't know about, the usual. But standing in the hallway with her arms around me, I thought, not once, not a single stranger ever saw us together and said, "He looks just like you." And I stepped back and looked at her face, and she smiled at me the way she always does, and her eyes were full of what looked like love, and also, I thought, maybe something else. Something that had always been there, that I had been categorizing as just the way she looked, but that might have been something like the permanent low-level awareness of a secret. I drove home. I need to tell you about the drive. It was 2 hours, and I was alone, just me and the road, and the early November gray. The trees completely bare now, the fields flat and brown. And somewhere around the halfway point, in the middle of flat agricultural nothing with no particular trigger, I started crying. Not sobbing, not dramatic, just tears, running down my face while I drove at a steady 67 miles per hour. I didn't wipe them right away, I just let them run. I was crying about something I hadn't confirmed yet. I was grieving something I didn't fully understand yet. But some part of me, some part that operates below the level of conscious reasoning, already knew, had probably known for days, was done arguing with the DNA test and the amended birth certificate and the 2-second pauses on the phone. That part of me was already in the after, and it was crying because the before was ending. The version of myself with the simple story was ending, and I was watching it go. The report from the Genealogical Research Service arrived on a Thursday. Not physically, they sent it digitally. I opened it at my kitchen table at 8:14 p.m. I know the time because I looked at my phone and then set it face down before I started reading. And I looked at my phone again when I finished, and it was 9:47 p.m. I had been reading for an hour and a half. I don't remember most of the reading as a sequential experience. I remember it as a series of facts arriving, each one rearranging something inside me. The first thing, I was adopted. This was confirmed. The original birth certificate, the one that existed before the amended version, listed a different set of parents, a birth mother whose name I won't share here. She was 22 years old when I was born. She was unmarried. She was from a city about 4 hours from where I grew up. The original certificate listed her, but no father. The amended certificate, the one my parents had, the one I'd always had, replaced her name with my mother's, replaced the absent father with my dad. Standard operation. Completely legal, completely normal. And yet,
the second thing, the birth mother's last name. I recognized it. Not from family, not from anything personal. I recognized it as a Jewish surname. Obviously, solidly, unambiguously Jewish. And something clicked into place so hard I felt it physically. The sound of a lock engaging. The 67% suddenly making perfect, complete sense. The report included some background. The adoption had been handled through a private agency. It had been finalized when I was 4 months old. My parents had been on the agency's list for 3 years before I was placed with them. 3 years. 3 years of waiting. Of 6:22 a.m. calls that didn't exist yet. Of Little League coaching positions not yet taken. Of soda bread not yet made. Of a child-shaped space in their house and their life, waiting to be filled. The report also included something I hadn't expected. It included information about the birth mother's current status. She was alive. She lived in a city on the East Coast. She was 52 years old. She was, according to public records the service had found, a licensed social worker. A social worker. I sat with that for a long time. The woman who gave me up for adoption when she was 22 had spent the next 30 decades helping other people navigate the systems that structure and sometimes shatter lives. I have no idea what to do with that. I still don't. The report also noted something about the DNA database, that I had been matched, through the testing service I'd used, with several people who appeared to be biological relatives. There was one close match, described by the algorithm as a likely first cousin or half-sibling. The profile was relatively sparse, just a username and a general location, but it was there. A person somewhere in the world who shared a significant portion of my genetics, who was connected to me through blood, who might or might not know I existed. I stared at that entry for a long time. I did not message them that night. I wasn't ready for the world to get larger. I needed to sit inside the new, smaller world first. I didn't call my parents that Sunday. I know. I just couldn't. I needed more time in the strange suspension of knowing and not yet having said it out loud. The state where you are the only one who knows that everything has changed, where the world looks exactly the same from the outside, but the inside has been completely reorganized. I went to work. I scanned documents. I ate meals. I walked to the corner store for groceries on Tuesday evening. I passed a woman on the sidewalk pushing a stroller, and I thought, she knows who that child's parents are. That child will never have to wonder. Which is a crazy thing to think about a stranger on the street. I was not in a very stable place. I understand that in retrospect. I started going back through photographs, not with any plan, just compulsively. I have a box of old photographs from my parents' house, things they gave me over the years. I spread them on my kitchen table one evening and just looked at them. There I am, at 6 months, being held by my mother. She is smiling so hugely it looks like it might hurt. She is holding me with this complete, almost fierce tenderness, like I am a thing she has been given and is terrified of losing. And I am looking at the camera with the blank, unfocused gaze of a 6-month-old. And I thought, she loved me, even at 6 months, even this recently arrived small stranger. She loved me with everything she had. That is visible in every photograph. It has always been visible, and I never knew what it contained. The love was completely real, and it was also, always, love for someone who came from somewhere else. Those two things were both true simultaneously. I couldn't figure out how to hold them both at once. I still can't. There's a photograph from my 5th birthday. I'm blowing out candles on a cake. My dad has his hand on my back, just resting there, not doing anything, just there. And the expression on his face as he watches me blow out the candles is so unguarded and so full of something. I had always read that expression as simple parental pride, which I think it was, but now I also see something else, something almost disbelieving, like a man who has been given something he was afraid he'd never have and still hasn't fully convinced himself it won't be taken away. He looks like a man maintaining his happiness, carefully, the way you hold a full glass and try not to spill it. I don't know if I'm reading that in or if it was always there, but I see it now and I can't unsee it. Middle school. I was about 12. There was a health class unit on genetics, basic stuff, Punnett squares, dominant and recessive traits, the usual. The teacher had us compare our eye color and hair color to our parents as an exercise. I have dark brown eyes. My mother has blue eyes. My father has hazel eyes. The teacher pointed out, not unkindly but very directly, that 2 light-eyed parents rarely produce dark-eyed children. This is not biologically impossible, but it is unusual. I remember my face getting hot. I remember several classmates looking at me. I remember the teacher moving on quickly, clearly regretting having used me as a demonstration. I went home and asked my mother about it. She said genetics are complicated, and didn't your great-uncle have dark eyes? I said I didn't know. She said, well, he did. And I believed her. I had no reason to not believe her. I built a great-uncle with dark eyes who I had never seen a photograph of, and filed it in the appropriate drawer, and did not think about it again for 18 years. I want to talk about something that I've thought a lot about in the weeks since this happened. The question of whether they should have told me. Because it's not a simple question. The year I was adopted, attitudes about adoption disclosure were different than they are now. There was a dominant school of thought that said closed adoptions protected everyone, protected the child from confusion, protected the adoptive parents from insecurity, protected the birth mother from grief. The sealed record, the amended certificate, the new story, a clean break, a fresh start. My parents were products of that era and that thinking. They did what they were told was best. I don't think they were doing something wrong. I think they were doing everything right. I think they came home with me, this 4-month-old with dark curly hair and dark eyes, who looked nothing like either of them, and they made a family. And the past was the past. For 30 years, it was the past. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. Every time I felt different, and I felt different often, not dramatically, not in a way that made me miserable, just the low, constant hum of not quite fitting. The way I moved through a room differently than my dad, the way I processed emotion differently than my mother. The interests that came from nowhere in the family history. I loved languages always, picked them up easily. My parents both struggled in high school Spanish. I took 4 languages in school and found them all relatively natural. I love music in a specific, almost compulsive way. My dad tolerates music. I think in certain registers that neither of my parents think in.
Picking up languages the same way, just living their lives somewhere in a history I was never given access to. I missed a week of these Sunday calls entirely, told my parents I'd been busy, swamped at work. I hated doing that. I've never really lied to them, or I thought I hadn't. Now I was starting to understand that maybe the whole relationship had been constructed on a lie that predated my consciousness, a lie that was in place before I could form memories, so that it wasn't really a lie between us, it was a condition that existed before us. The ground we were standing on was already not what I'd been told it was before I'd ever taken a step on it. I don't know if that's better or worse. I genuinely don't know. I finally called a therapist. I want to include this because it feels dishonest not to. I'm not the kind of person who has typically sought that out. Not for any principled reason, just inertia, just the avoidance of things that feel difficult. But I was not doing well. I was not sleeping properly, I was not eating properly. I was going through my days with this enormous thing sitting in the center of my chest that I could not put down or set aside or talk to anyone about. So I made an appointment. and I sat across from a stranger and told her everything, from the birthday DNA kit to the genealogical report to the photographs on the kitchen table. And she listened, and at the end, she said something I keep thinking about. She said, "You've spent your whole life building a coherent story about who you are, and now you found out the foundation of that story is different than you thought. That doesn't mean the story was false. It means the story needs a larger frame." I thought that was a useful way to think about it. I'm still not sure I agree with it entirely, but I'm trying. Also, real quick, if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a decent time to do that. New stories go up every week, and some of them never get announced anywhere. They just appear. The only way to catch those is to already be there when they drop. Just something to consider while this one continues. I called my parents on a Sunday, 3 weeks after I got the report. I'd been thinking about what to say for those 3 weeks. I'd written notes and then deleted them. I'd rehearsed things and then abandoned them. In the end, I said nothing I'd rehearsed. I called on a Sunday morning the way I always do. We talked about normal things for a few minutes, and then I said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know that I'm not angry, but I need to talk about it." And I told them I'd done the DNA test and gotten unexpected results, and I'd requested my birth records, and I knew. The silence on the line was not 2 seconds this time. It was much longer. I could hear my mother's breathing. And then my father said, "We always meant to tell you," which is simultaneously everything and nothing. It is the most human thing that has ever been said to me. "We always meant to tell you." My dad started talking, quietly, in that focused way of his, the way he gets when something needs to be addressed and there's no point in not addressing it. He talked for a long time, and I mostly listened. He said they had adopted me through a private agency when they were 33. They tried to have children for 5 years before that, and it hadn't worked. The agency placed me when I was 4 months old. He said I came to them in November, a gray November morning, and my mother held me for the first hour and cried. Not sad crying, he said. Not sad. He said they had discussed telling me. Several times over the years they had discussed it, but every time they approached it, they found reasons to wait. You were so little. Then you were adjusting to school. Then middle school was hard enough already. Then high school. Then you were in college and doing so well. Then time passed, and the moment became impossibly large. The longer they waited, the larger it became. And then more time passed, and they told themselves, you were happy, and the past was the past, and maybe it didn't need to be unearthed. And they were wrong. He said, we were wrong. And I believe him. And I don't entirely forgive him yet. And I also know I probably will. My mother got on the phone at some point. She was crying. She said she loved me from the first minute, which I know, which I have always known without knowing this. She said she was sorry. She said it several times. I said, I know, Mom. I said, I love you. Because I do. Because you can know something is wrong and still love the people who did it. Because love doesn't require a clean record or a simple explanation. I know that now in a way I didn't before. Love is apparently something that operates on a completely different system than truth. They can coexist in the same relationship. They can coexist in the same person. They are coexisting in me right now, and they are not comfortable neighbors, but they are neighbors. We talked for almost 2 hours. By the end, my father's voice was rough in a way I'd never heard it. My dad doesn't cry, at least not where I can hear it. But his voice was rough, and at the end he said, you are my son. Not were, not legally, are. Present tense, permanent tense. You are my son. And I said, I know, Dad. And I think I meant it, even though I was sitting alone in my apartment above the dry cleaner with my whole sense of self rearranged like furniture after a move. Everything in the same room, just in different places. Nothing lost exactly, just repositioned. I should talk about the biological side, because I've been circling it, and I'm going to have to address it eventually. The match on the DNA database, the likely first cousin or half-sibling. I looked at the profile again a few weeks after the call with my parents. Still sparse, just a username and a region. I composed a message 6 times and deleted it. What do you say? Hey, I might be your biological relative, and I found out I was adopted at age 30, and I don't really know what I'm looking for, but here is all my chaos. Hello? Something like that. I eventually sent something much shorter and more composed than that. Just, hello, I recently learned I was adopted, and the database matched us as close relatives. If you're open to talking, I would be glad to connect. No pressure. I sent it on a Tuesday at 11 p.m., and then I lay awake until 2 a.m., and then I slept, and then I woke up and looked at my phone, and there was no reply. There was no reply for 4 days. On the 5th day, there was a reply. They wrote back. The person. They said they had been waiting for this message for years. They said their mother had told them, when they were old enough to understand, that there was a cousin who had been placed for adoption before they were born. They said they had always wondered if that person would appear someday in the databases. They said, welcome. That was the word they used. Welcome. This stranger who shared my genetics, who knew I existed while I didn't know they did, who had been waiting for a message like mine for years, said, welcome. As if I had just arrived somewhere I'd always been expected. I read that word several times. Welcome. And I thought about what it means to be welcomed somewhere you didn't know you were going, to arrive at a place you had no map for, and find that someone left a light on. We've exchanged several messages now. I'm not going to share the details of those conversations, because they belong to something that's still forming and still private. But I will say this. It's strange, talking to someone who shares my genetics but not my history. We have some things in common that feel slightly uncanny. Not supernatural, not magical, just the quiet eeriness of finding a similar pattern in a different tapestry.
It's not like finding a twin. It's not like finding a sibling. It's not like any relationship I've ever had. It's something new. A new kind of relationship that doesn't have a name yet in my internal taxonomy. I'm trying to make room for it. I'm trying to make room for a lot of things. Let me tell you about the last time I went home to see my parents. This was about 2 months after the phone call. The first visit back. I was nervous on the drive down. That same 2-hour stretch of road. The flat fields, the bare trees, the November gray that had settled into December gray. I kept running scenarios. Would it be awkward? Would we be overly careful with each other? Would we circle the thing without landing on it? Would we land on it too hard?
I pulled into the driveway and my dad was in the garage, same as always. He looked up when I pulled in, and he crossed the driveway to meet me, which he doesn't usually do. He usually waits in the garage. He came out and he met me at the car, and he shook my hand, and then he pulled me in and held on for a moment. My father is not a hugger, has never been a hugger. This is a fact of my life since I can remember. He held on for a moment, and then he let go, and he said, "Good to see you, kid." And I said, "Good to see you, Dad." And we went inside. My mother had made too much food, which is her love language in every season. We sat at the kitchen table and ate and talked about regular things. The plumbing, the neighbor's dog, whether I was seeing anyone, the usual constellation of topics. But underneath the regularity, there was something different, a different quality to the air, like a room after a window has been opened for the first time in years. Fresher, slightly. Colder, maybe, but fresher. We talked about the adoption at some point after dinner. Not everything, not the deepest parts, but some things. My mother told me about the day they got the call from the agency. She said she was at work, at her desk, and the phone rang, and she picked it up, and the woman from the agency said, "Are you sitting down?" And she wasn't. She was standing up, and she sat down right there in the middle of the office. And the woman said, "There's a baby boy, and we'd like to discuss placing him with you." And my mother said, sitting at our kitchen table 30 years later, she said, "I put the phone down and put my face in my hands and just shook. Just shook." She said it wasn't even crying. It was more like her whole body had been holding something for 3 years, and all of a sudden it could let it go. And I sat across from her at that kitchen table, and I thought, she wanted me. Before she knew anything about me, before she knew what I'd look like or who I'd become, she wanted me so much she shook. I don't know how to account for that. I don't know what category it goes in. It goes in every category. I've been thinking about identity, about how much of who you are is the story you've been told about yourself, and how much is something else. Something that runs underneath the story. I was raised Irish Catholic in a Midwestern town. I have the accent, the sensibility, the frame of reference. The specific ironic stoicism of that culture is in me. The way I cook too much food for gatherings is directly inherited from my mother. These are real inheritances. They happened. They are part of who I am. And also, the 67%, the genetics I carry that express themselves in my curly hair and my olive skin, and my facility with language and my relationship to music, those are also real. Those are also part of who I am. They were always there, just unlabeled, just existing without context. The question is not which inheritance is real. Both are real. The question I'm still working on is how to carry them both without either one canceling each other out. My therapist asks me sometimes what I would have wanted. As in, if I could have changed the circumstances, what would I have changed? And I struggle with this. I don't wish I hadn't been adopted. I can't wish that. The life I had is the life I had, and I loved it, mostly. The father who called at 6:22 a.m. and the mother who kept every drawing. I don't want a different version of that. But I also think I would have wanted to know. I think I deserved to know. Not to shatter anything, not to undo anything. Just to know the shape of my own story. To not have spent 30 years making up explanations for my dark eyes and my curly hair, and the way I don't quite fit in the genetic logic of my family. To not have felt the low hum of inexplicable difference, and filed it under random variation and moved on.
I would have wanted to know so that I could have been the one deciding what to do with the knowledge, instead of having the knowledge arrive all at once, uninvited, through a birthday gift from a coworker, through a spit tube in a pie chart, and the word amended on a government document. That's the part that stings. Not the adoption, the timing, the method, the 30 years of small mysteries that I solved with wrong answers. My birth mother. I haven't contacted her. I don't know if I will. I've thought about it a lot, more than I've thought about almost anything. She was 22 when I was born, unmarried, the record said. I don't know anything about the circumstances beyond that. I don't know if she made the decision alone or with pressure. I don't know if she's thought about me. I don't know if she's thought about me every day or put the whole thing somewhere sealed and has lived her life. I don't know if a letter from me would be welcomed the way that message was welcomed, or if it would land on her life like something falling from a great height. She's a social worker. She has spent 30 years working with vulnerable people. I find myself constructing a story about her the way I used to construct stories about myself, filling in the gaps with reasonable guesses, and then I catch myself and stop. Because the last time I constructed a story about myself without checking the actual records, I got it completely wrong. There's a specific kind of grief in this that I didn't anticipate. The grief isn't for the family I have. I know that family is real and I'm not losing it. The grief is for the version of me who will never know what it was like to grow up knowing. That person doesn't exist. That version of me who might have, at some point in childhood, asked questions and gotten answers, who might have grown up understanding why they looked the way they looked, who might have known, even abstractly, even just as information, that there were other people out in the world who shared something fundamental with them.
That version of me who never had to lie awake cataloging memories, trying to build a case against their own family, that person is gone. Was never there, actually. You can't grieve someone who never existed. And yet, some practical things have changed in the month since all of this. I've told a few people. My therapist, obviously. Dana from work, the one who gave me the kit, who feels terrible about it in a completely irrational way that I keep telling her is not her fault. A friend from college who I trust with things. Telling people is strange because it requires also telling them the whole context of what adoption means in this case. That I'm not devastated in the way people sometimes expect. That I still love my parents and intend to keep having a relationship with them. That I'm not on a mission to find my biological family and build a new life. I'm just a person who found out a significant fact about themselves at an age when you expect all the significant facts about yourself to already be known. Like finding out your name is spelled differently than you thought. The name is still the name, but you've been spelling it wrong for 30 years. And now you have to decide whether to correct it going forward or keep it as is, or some combination of both. I took a day off work in early December. Nothing dramatic, I just couldn't focus. I drove somewhere. Ended up at this lake about 40 minutes from my apartment. The kind of lake that has a walking path around it, a wooden dock, a few benches. Completely empty on a December weekday. I walked around it 3 times, which is probably further than it sounds. It's a big lake. By the end of the 3rd loop, I was cold and my feet were damp, and I felt, not better exactly, but more located, more in my body, more in the actual present. I sat on a bench at the end of the dock and watched the water. The water was very still, very gray, and I thought about the specific fact that I exist, which sounds like a nothing thought, but it felt significant in that moment. I exist. A 22-year-old woman made a decision in difficult circumstances 30 years ago. A couple waited 3 years and got a phone call and shook with relief. A social worker filed paperwork. A hospital issued a certificate. The certificate was amended, and as a result of all of that machinery of circumstance and decision and documentation, I exist. I am here, cold on a bench above a gray December lake, more confused about who I am than I have ever been in my life, and also somehow still myself, still the person who loves languages and music, still the person who finds meaning in bringing order to old records, still the person who picks up the phone every Sunday, still the son of the man who called at 6:22 a.m., still the son of the woman who kept every drawing. All of that is still true. More is also true, but all of that is still true.
The Christmas that year was quiet. I went home. We didn't talk extensively about any of it. We didn't need to right then. We had dinner and watched the game, and my mother made soda bread because that's what she does at Christmas. That's our tradition. It has always been our tradition. And I sat at the table eating soda bread, and I thought, this tradition belongs to my dad's Irish family going back however many generations. It doesn't biologically belong to me. And also, it completely belongs to me, because I have eaten this bread every Christmas of my life, and it tastes like my childhood, and it tastes like home. And home is not only a genetic fact. Home is also every Christmas morning, every kitchen smell, every 6:22 a.m. phone call. Home is constructed as much as inherited, maybe more. My dad and I went for a walk after dinner. We do this sometimes, always have. The neighborhood is quiet on Christmas evening, lights in windows, occasional sound of families through walls, cold, clear air. We walked for a while without talking much, which is also something we do. My dad is comfortable with silence in a way not everyone is. I got that from him, I think, the comfort with silence. And at some point he said, I think about it, And I knew what he meant. I said, I know. He said, I should have handled it differently. And there's something about my father saying he should have handled something differently. This man who handles things, who fixes things, who is calm when everything goes sideways, admitting he mishandled the central navigational fact of my life. It was an enormous admission. It cost him something. I could feel that. I said, "I know, Dad." I said, "It's okay." Which is not entirely true, but it's more true than not. And it's getting truer, slowly but measurably. The way spring comes. You can't see it day to day, but you can see it across weeks. Here is what I know now that I didn't know before. I know that identity is not a fixed thing discovered once and then possessed. It is something assembled continuously from available materials. The materials include genetics and family and culture and language and memory and coincidence and choice, and sometimes a birthday DNA kit given as a joke. The materials are not all voluntary. You don't get to choose your starting materials, but the assembly is ongoing. It doesn't stop at any particular age. It doesn't stop at 30. It probably doesn't stop at all. I know that love is more structurally robust than I gave it credit for, that it can hold the weight of a secret kept too long, that it can survive the kind of rearrangement I went through. Not unchanged, not the same love as before, but the same category of love. My parents love me and I love them, and this is still the central governing fact of that relationship. Just now, we all know the whole context. Just now, we're carrying the same information instead of different versions of it. Just now, when my father calls at 6:22 a.m., we both know the full extent of what that call means, what it has always meant. This man chose to be my father before I could form a single memory, committed to that role and never wavered from it. The biology is irrelevant to the commitment. The commitment is the thing. I know that there are people in the world who share my genetics, who have their own lives and their own stories, who are connected to me through something older and more fundamental than choice, and that I may or may not pursue those connections, and that either choice is legitimate, and that whatever I decide, those people exist, and something in me that was always there now has a direction it can point toward, even if I don't walk in that direction right away, even if I never walk in that direction. At least I know the direction exists. I know that records don't lie the way people do, but that people lie, usually out of love rather than cruelty.
My parents sealed those records and told me a version of myself that they thought would protect me. They were wrong about what protection required, but they weren't wrong to want to protect me. The mechanism was flawed. The impulse was not. I am trying to separate those two things, trying to judge the mechanism while still understanding the impulse. It's work. It's ongoing work. I suspect it will be ongoing for a long time. And I know this. I sat in a dry cleaner's building for 10 years, surrounded by the smell of chemical solvents and the mechanical rhythm of the industrial press, making sense of old documents for a living, making the past legible, spending my days bringing order to the historical record of other people's lives, not knowing that my own historical record had a gap in it, not knowing that the story of how I came to exist in the world was sitting in a file somewhere, waiting to be found, amended. The word was amended, and it turns out the whole world can be amended. The whole understanding of yourself can be amended, and you can survive the amendment, and you can survive it and still be you, still eat Christmas soda bread, still get calls at 6:22 a.m., still love the people who raised you, still grieve the version of yourself who will never know what it was like to have always known, still be walking towards something you don't have a name for yet, still, in every way that matters, still you. Be me, 30 years old, finding out for the first time that I've been myself all along, just with more story than I knew about. The story is larger than I thought. The frame is bigger. I'm still standing in the middle of it, looking at the parts I haven't understood yet. The 22-year-old woman in a city 4 hours away, the matching DNA profile that said welcome, the amended document, the soda bread, the 6:22 a.m. calls. All of it is mine. All of it is me. I just have to figure out what to do with that, which I will, probably. I'll let you know. Anon out.